Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Livestream Podcast Q&A section. I have put the potatoes in the oven for dinner, which I think technically means this is a crossover cooking show at this point.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about the steaks?
The steaks are, they are marinating. Cool. All right. So we have a lot of questions to get to, and we will not get to all of them. We are going to start with the questions that I solicited on Twitter, and then we will get to as many of the super chat questions as we can. We've got a large influx. So anyway, hopefully we'll get to your question if you've asked one. And if not, our apologies. So the first question that I wanted us to answer was from a Twitter avatar, Ari. What do we think of Madagascar's announced cure for the Wuhan Enigma virus?
What?
Madagascar has announced that they have found a cure. It is plant-based, and they have turned it into a tonic. The plant is one that is used to treat malaria, but it is not used in its raw form. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but in any case, they have announced that they have a tonic that they believe is effective because they've cured a couple of people, and there are apparently many orders from Africa for this tonic. And I think the president has famously drunk some of this tonic on...
The president of Madagascar.
Yes, the president of Madagascar has drunk this on video, demonstrating at least that it's not so toxic that it would kill a president outright. All right, what do we think of it? Well, first thing...
Can't be dubious.
Yeah, but let's just say, look, first of all, I'm rooting for Madagascar. We have spent a lot of time in Madagascar. It is a wonderful, if very frustrating place, as I always say.
It's desperately poor. It's almost always at the bottom of lists of countries with regard to GDP and poverty level and such. It's just desperately, desperately poor.
So let's give the chances that this cure works a strong ngamba.
Ngamba.
Ngamba,
Okay.
Yes.
Ngamba peut-être may be.
Yes, exactly. Ngamba peut-être may be.
That's Malagasy French and English, all meaning, probably not.
It's probably not going to work. But here's the thing. I don't know what it means that they've cured 2 people with this, because basically if you don't die of COVID-19, you get better. So you get better, less thirsty, I guess, if you've had tonic. On the other hand, maybe they've seen something. And in fact, I should say, we should not joke so much about this. I believe this arises out of the Pasteur Institute, which is a place that you and I have actually spent some time. We've never been in, but we've spent some time in that part of Tana.
In Tana, in the capital city.
Yep, it's a real institute. So anyway, we're rooting for you, Madagascar. It would be wonderful if this worked, and it would be great news for the world, and it would... establish Madagascar in a realm that it is not typically thought of as the leader in medical breakthroughs. So anyway, that'd be great. That said, highly doubtful that this is going to work, as I would say I at least am, and I'm sure you are, of many of the hopeful things that have been announced. You know, I get several things a day where somebody is announcing that the cure is just around the corner, that this person or that person has come up with it, and believe it when we see it. Okay, second question is, how does our concept of collective consciousness map onto Jung's the collective unconscious? I should say that in English. How does our concept of collective consciousness map onto Jung's collective unconscious? I would say it is almost the opposite. Yes. Certainly when we formulated the term, Jung was on our mind, but what Jung means by the collective unconscious is like an inherited kind of knowledge that would exist within a lineage. That would not be a conscious thing, right?
He's almost describing what we're calling culture.
Yes, I agree. That's why I say it's the opposite, is it does function more like culture now.
And I don't know enough about Jung to be sure that it's a perfect map there, but it's at least more related to our formulation of culture than that of consciousness.
Yes, in our schema, what he's talking about is very close to what we call culture. What we call culture is the things transmitted from one individual to another and edited by selection. Consciousness is an active exchange and parallel processing of ideas. So anyway, it is his collective unconscious is what we mean by culture, approximately. And that's the inverse of what we might mean by consciousness. So anyway, great question. Thanks for asking it. Okay. All right, on to Super Chat.
I will say that there are a ton of good questions here. We won't get through all of them. We might begin doing, I don't know, every nth podcast, having gone back through and just responding on our own time to 3 or 4 of the questions that we never got to before.
Yeah, ones we wished we'd gotten to.
Wish we'd gotten to.
Yep.
And for right now, we've just tried to do a really quick ranking based on sort of, dollar amount and first pass, like, oh, is that something interesting? There's a lot of kudos and gratitude coming towards us, for which we are indeed grateful to you guys. Thank you.
Which is meta-gratitude.
It's meta-gratitude. Big fan of you both. I've learned more from these live streams than I have from my public education. Thank you. Unfortunately, the bar is low. Question. Given the scientific lens both of you view the world through, where do you stand on whether or not love is real?
Come on. Love is real. I'm in pain hearing that question because...
Oh, come on. I put it at the top because I thought it was a fun, good question.
It's a great question, but it implies that the person asking it has not had an experience of love so powerful that they are certain of its existence.
I don't think we have to go there. I think there is a general understanding of those things that science can describe as separate from those things that many humans recognize as real, but science dismisses as outside the realm of that which can be described or explained by science. And part of what this evolutionary lens allows is an integration of more of the parts, the subjective, the qualitative aspects of human experience with a scientific understanding.
Yeah. So, I would say, for my part, these things are often more tractable than science gives them credit for. That they're, because it's an emergent property and not one that is easily seen with reductionism, it tends to be understood late rather than early. And in the intervening period, it is often dismissed. But I see nothing troubling about the concept or any hallmark that would suggest that it's a metaphor. In fact, I think at this point we can just simply say you can probably see it in the brain scan. Your dog definitely loves you, and the explanation for it is, I don't think, in any way troubling. It's honorable, and it's one of the greatest inventions that evolution will ever have devised.
And I guess I'll say too that when we were sort of blocking out what was going to go in our book, 3 of the chapters in the middle are on sex and gender, and on relationship and parenting, and on childhood. And I was sort of describing to you what I saw as going in each of these, but I couldn't quite find, I knew that they all went together, but I couldn't quite find the through line. And you said, well, the through line's obvious. The through line is love. That's why they're together there. That's what connects them. And that is how we get from the beginning of that whole section to the end.
And then I believe your response was, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a secondhand emotion, which I think is one of the great lyrics of all time. All right. Yes, anyway, love's awesome.
Tina Turner's words in my mouth. Okay.
Right, there you go.
Okay. Next question. Traditionally, humans ate as much sugar as possible to make it through winter, then shed the fat, fluctuating fat stores, but it seems healthier to have a steady weight. When ought we follow ancestral footsteps? Boy, there's a lot in there. When ought we follow ancestral footsteps is itself basically the question that we ask throughout most of this book that we are currently working on a second draft of, and which will be out in about a year. There are a couple things in the formulation of the question, though, that are assumptions that I'm not sure are right. Traditionally, humans ate as much sugar as possible to make it through winter, then shed the fat, fluctuating fat stores. That's true in a temperate climate, but of course, until estimates vary, but call it something between 100 and 200,000 years ago, all humans were in relatively tropical, I want to put aseasonal here in scare quotes, environments where there were certainly seasonal fluctuations in food availability, but it wasn't so much temperature variation and a putting on a lot of weight at one season and losing a lot of weight in another. Then the other assumption here that I'm not sure about, it seems healthier to have a steady weight. Not at all convinced that is necessarily true. I'm not sure it's not true, but I don't know that there's evidence for that. You got anything on that?
Yeah, I think they're, within bounds.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, why, 100 pounds up and down is obviously not healthy.
It's bad. Yeah. 10 pounds is probably normal. But, I think, look, we are off the end of the evolutionary tape in some sense. We have taken the genius of our ancestors' wisdom and turned it into a novel world that is now making us sick. It's making us sick physically, socially, psychologically, and we have to figure out what part of the wisdom still applies and what part is no longer relevant to us. And that's really, in some sense, the modern human condition. It is a reflection of an ancestral conundrum that our ancestors would have faced many times, but it is a turbocharged version of it. So anyway, I think you're on the right topic, and that question requires a highly conscious, deliberate response, which is going to involve many of us tapping into each other's consciousness in order to solve it.
Next question. Thoughts on H2O2 therapy, that's hydrogen peroxide. In relation to COVID-19 issues, you have thoughts on H2O2 therapy in relation to COVID-19 issues? You two have literally saved my sanity. Thank you for the much needed honesty. So the question is about hydrogen peroxide therapy, which I think is also sometimes called oxygenation therapy. I know just a tiny bit about it. It was brought up as a possible cure for cancer, the idea being that cancer cells often existed in low oxygen environments, and it was imagined that they couldn't do as well in high oxygen environments. And so if you added H2O2, hydrogen peroxide, to those environments and thus increased the level of oxygen, you would cause the cancer cells to thrive less well. There is a tiny bit of evidence, I think, that supports the basic premise, and a lot of evidence that suggests actually no, the low oxygen environments in which cancer cells are being found is neither causal nor universal. So that would seem to debunk it. As for therapy for COVID-19 issues, I would guess that there would be similar concerns. Why do we imagine that we've got a low or a high oxygen concern, and when we see it, are we looking at a cause or an effect or a correlation that's actually explained by something else?
Yeah, I'm not in a very different position from you. I'm aware that it exists, but I don't know whether to trust that it's highly valuable. I would say you want to be very careful about the concentration that you use. Hydrogen peroxide is one of these things that's actually pretty safe at low concentration because it's a molecule that our ancestors encountered. But at higher concentrations, it has caustic effects that you don't want to inflict on yourself. So
the 3% concentration that you get in the brown bottles is safe for most applications, but
breathing higher, it being, the question. Anyway, proceed with caution.
Yeah. This seems like a comment rather than a question regarding confusing terms. Gatekeeper linguistics, also known as spellcasting. So I think Jim is offering up some terms that we can use to, jargon that would appear to keep people out is gatekeeper linguistics. Science, politics, every rarefied field, every specialized field has this. And then the users will tend to bring out the terms when they are least sure, most interested in confusing who they're talking to, and maybe they're not even aware that that's what they're doing. But jargon, gatekeeper linguistics is most useful when you kind of want to put up smoke and not have a lot of questions come your way afterwards.
I have one fear about this.
Okay.
Because nobody's ever heard of gatekeeper linguistics.
Yeah.
It functions as a kind of jargon, whereas jargon functions as a term of art.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, don't take it personally, Jim. I like where you're going, but maybe jargon is just the thing people will recognize.
Okay.
Although spellcasting, that has a nice ring to it.
Absolutely. Big fan. Is there an evolutionary argument for informing an hypothesis that humankind's ability to perform careful abstract thought is on the decline due to being diluted by population size? That is, nobody is as dumb as all of us, so to speak.
There's something to the idea that there will certainly be diminishing returns as you plug more brains into each other. And so there's a point at which those returns might not asymptote, but would actually decline because of the cost of the confusion that would go along with it. On the other hand,
but you also get longer tails.
Yeah, you get longer tails.
The population, the longer the tails you have.
And the real question is, You don't have to plug into everybody all the time. You can plug into whatever network is paying the highest dividends for the kind of question you're engaging. So anyway, the danger you're talking about is probably real if we just all do exactly what we're doing on the internet, which is plug into some giant network that doesn't have any coherence to it. But if we edit down to productive subsets, much is possible, and that should scale indefinitely.
Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts on HIV not being the real cause of AIDS? I've heard real doctors connect the fact that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, but it's actually the drugs that they use to treat HIV and influxes of toxins in the environment, particularly in Africa in the 80s.
Yeah, I have some thoughts here. One, Nobel laureate Kary Mullis, back in the early days, he got his Nobel Prize for PCR, a very important technique in biology, and he pointed out that the criteria that are used to establish that a pathology is caused by a pathogen were not met in the case of HIV. And so basically there were people who had AIDS who didn't have detectable virus, and there were people who had the virus who didn't have detectable AIDS. Now, the problem with this is that this is a complex system. This is not a billiard table. And acquired immunodeficiency syndrome is a set of things that unfolds when certain things have happened to your immune system. The most obvious of them is attack by HIV, which attacks killer T cells, among other things. But anything that disrupts the same upstream phenomenon will cause the downstream set of symptoms. So you shouldn't even really expect that the only thing that's going to cause AIDS is HIV, because HIV basically attacks a certain set of cells, and anything else that did that would cause the same phenomenology. Likewise, you might expect that a certain number of people, for whatever reason, have endogenous resistance to HIV and therefore could contract the virus and not ever suffer from the pathology. So, in essence, what's wrong is our expectation for a one-to-one match between infection and pathology. That does not mean that there was not some phenomenon circulating in Africa that might have masqueraded as HIV in light of the fact that people were searching for it. But I don't know of any evidence, and it might be that I've just missed it, but I don't know of any evidence that that was a widespread problem. I would say in general, we know that HIV tends to cause AIDS, strongly tends to cause it, and that what we had was a pandemic arising out of the spread of HIV.
Good. The next is a recommendation for a book that I'm at least not familiar with, but it sounds interesting. The Philosophy of Conspiracy Theories by Matt Dentith. It's based on his PhD thesis in philosophy. And the writer says it could be useful for language to help distinguish warranted and unwarranted conspiracy theories. Thanks for the tip.
Yep, I would say conspiracy hypotheses, but yeah, other than that, yes.
Next question from Echo. You said viruses are freed genes trying to get into the future horizontally by moving between hosts, like genes space exploration mode. Is exploration mode a universal in living organisms, and if so, why?
So Echo is referring to a concept of mine called explorer modes, and the basic idea is that evolution has discovered ways to enhance its discovery of adaptive states. So consciousness would be such an adaptation. Consciousness would allow us to discover opportunities that we wouldn't find absent consciousness. I can't say that explorer modes will be universal, but I can say that the value of explorer modes is so high that anytime one is available, it will tend to be discovered if given enough time. So yes, I think viruses are evidencing explorer modes, and I believe there will be features of their behavior that actually will cause pathology and that we will thus be able to identify which match the explorer mode hypothesis. But that said, the devil's in the details, and the trick is going to be coming up with precise predictions that separate that hypothesis from other things that would explain pathologies.
Yeah, let me also just say that two other examples of explorer modes that you didn't just mention, but which are outside of the domains we've been talking about, are army ants after they break bivouac and are looking for new things to eat. follow these exploratory maps that, these landscapes that you can map, and it looks very much like the other thing, which is neurons in young brains growing connections, and then afterwards having those connections selectively cut as the brain sort of not atrophy but mature into the adult brain form.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a question about evolutionary explanation and other things that match it. I agree. Those are actual examples of exploration. Also, the way trees find the places in the canopy that are empty and therefore have disproportionate light.
Yep.
So there are lots of things that look like this, and it's an important topic.
Next question. Does unconscious bias play a role with respect to keeping our economy shut down? Polling shows those more left-leaning wanting to keep the economy shut down, knowing that an economic downturn hurts Trump's chances for re-election. So I don't think the writer means to suggest that left-leaning people necessarily, that the poll doesn't show that left-leaning people wanting to keep it shut down know that will hurt Trump's chances for re-election, but it's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Is there unconscious bias here?
Well, I believe there's unconscious bias all over this question.
Yeah.
I have to say, I am not convinced, as much as I do think Trump has clearly erred again and again with respect to the response to the pandemic. It is not clear to me that in a matchup with Joe Biden, that this doesn't play to his strength, because to the extent that people are frightened, and I think people are frightened and will be, more frightened as winter returns, to the extent that they may be looking for a strong person rather than somebody who appears to be enfeebled by encroaching dementia. Whether or not that's actually taking place with Biden, it certainly appears to be. And so, anyway, I don't know how this plays out, but I must say, I think it's time to pull the emergency brake cable and find a different path, because whichever side thinks they know how this plays out, I think they're wrong.
Okay. I'm not sure that really addresses the question, but I guess you started there and said, yes, unconscious bias is clearly playing a role. It's not clear. Maybe I would just finish by saying it's not clear how much conscious bias there is in this direction, but is there unconscious bias in which people are playing to their usual roles? Yes, I think so. Okay. Next question. Thank you. Does globalization and social connectivity via technology or consciousness derive a more homogeneous culture across humankind over time? Is cultural singularity possible, inevitable, dangerous?
A
lot of questions.
All of the above, but
Yeah.
I think we're caught between two failure modes. One is the homogeneous failure mode, and the other is the inability to get along, to comprehend each other, and to properly govern planet Earth. And I realize that I have a dedicated group of antagonists who, if I say things like govern the Earth, they imagine that I'm calling for some kind of global dictatorship and the black helicopters are about to descend, which is not what I'm saying. But we do have to govern the Earth because we are employing processes that have global scale consequences. We have to govern it, right? We are left with no choice, or we will destroy the place. So to the extent that that's necessary, it may be time for us to recognize that our individuality as cultures is being eroded, whether we like it or not, by all sorts of phenomena, and that doing this in a conscious, careful way is better than just allowing the internet to do it to us and suffering the consequences of not having proper governance at all the scales that require it.
I'll just add with regard to the last part of the question, is cultural singularity possible, inevitable, dangerous? I fear that it's possible. I fear even more that it's inevitable, and I'm certain that it's dangerous.
Very well said.
Next question. Thoughts on apparent irony with regard to Haidt's, that's Jonathan Haidt's contagion analogy of the right's push to reopen, that is risking infection by mixing, and the left's push to stay at home, that is accepting stagnation by isolating, ? So this is, I'm not actually totally familiar. I don't remember Haidt's contagion analogy, but I assume from the question that this is bringing up the well-replicated result from personality tests like the Big Five that show that conservatives are more likely to have a very strong disgust response, and Things like disgust in response to disease and dirt are a stronger response typically in people on the right, whereas people on the left tend to have more openness, and that's just the clinical term, openness to experience and such, and therefore to some degree openness to disease. And this seems to have flipped those roles. So there's thoughts on the apparent irony. Yes, it has flipped the roles. There's actually a pretty interesting paper that I don't know that it adds much to this, but it points out the same apparent flip in the roles actually in Heterodox Academy's site, which of course Jonathan Haidt was one of the founders of. This week, I could probably find that and link to it. I'm not sure I have much more to say right now about this, though.
Yeah. It's interesting, but again, I think in some sense we're all being led by the nose, and we would be wise to resist the politicization, which is causing the flip and the irony that you're talking about. There's something just very difficult to swallow about the fact that, yes, the right is being inflamed by the authoritarian nature of the response to the pandemic. They are, to the extent that they want to open back up, they are incorrect. It's very dangerous. On the other hand, there are features of the lockdown that are so absurd that it's easy to see how you could suspect that the whole thing was garbage.
Yep.
So in any case, we got to level up.
Yeah. What's your take on the virus first hypothesis, stating that some viruses predate cellular life? Could those have fostered cellular life complexity? Is it a chicken or egg dilemma? Wishful attribution of intent? ? This again from Echo. Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Echo manages to get a lot into one question.
I'd say the chicken and egg question is easy, so it can't be that. The question of could viruses precede all life? I don't think the viruses that we have could precede the life that we have. They cannot be the origin. What they've done is
they require a host.
Yes. Right. I mean, it could be so many steps down the trail that you can't tell what they were, but I think there's no reason to suspect this. The much more parsimonious hypothesis is that they have jettisoned cellular machinery in order to be more effective at moving horizontally.
So actually the next question, also from Echo, sort of continues this. Do you agree that stating asteroids could carry virus remnants capable of affecting Earth life comes back to stating that life forms similar to ours have emerged before or elsewhere in the universe? Thanks. So yes, I do think that those two things are the same thing, and they both seem totally implausible.
So wait. One thing is viruses
asteroids could carry virus remnants capable of affecting Earth life, and life forms similar to ours have emerged before or elsewhere in the universe. So if asteroids have shown up with truly alien life, then yes, that is consistent with the only thing that's consistent with is then life evolved elsewhere. But the idea that anything that evolved elsewhere is actually capable of infecting us, if life has evolved elsewhere, which it almost certainly has, the chances that it uses DNA as its information molecule is basically zero. And you don't ever want to say it's zero, but it's basically zero. So there's going to be some other information molecule that is used to carry information between generations. And it may well have, it might even have nitrogenous bases, but still not be DNA or RNA. And it might be silicon-based instead. It might be any number of things.
Even if it was DNA or RNA, which is conceivable, it would not have the same code. And so it would be meaningless.
I actually think that the much less likely thing is that the molecule was DNA.
Oh, I think it's very unlikely. But I'm saying you could imagine that the chemical structure would be analogous. But even that doesn't get you to infection because the codon structure would be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many steps to get to the molecule that looks anything like DNA or RNA.
Well, I agree with you 100%. If it didn't evolve on Earth, it's not going to be very effective at infecting us. It's not to say, in light of prion diseases or something, you couldn't get some sort of, phenomenon where something caused a pathology that didn't interact with our physiology and information directly. But it's so unlikely. And,
the question is specifically about viruses.
Yes.
But some other kind of pathogen that could cause like a mechanical damage of some sort or a toxin. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
30 minutes.
Okay, let's try to get a few more of these before we switch to the other live chat questions, super chat questions. Your conversations are insightful and have been an important navigation aid for me. Thank you. How do you square admonishing listeners to subscribe, like, notify to help the channel when merely driving algorithmic support isn't the explicit intention of those functions?
A requirement that we fight in a game theoretic paradigm that we did not invent. So basically, I would say, here's the thing. You, our viewers, and we have an aligned interest in creating a substrate that this podcast can function on. This is very cheap to you, and it's cheap for us to ask it. And to the extent that people do it, it creates more content of a kind you want to see. So I don't feel too bad about it. Who does it cost? Well, it might cost Google, but I'm not too concerned.
Okay. Thoughts on the PCR testing used for COVID and how the creator of it said that it should never be used for identifying a germ, and how the RNA snips being used to identify COVID aren't necessarily what live up to Koch's postulates. I wonder if the creator of it is not referring to the creator of PCR here and exactly referring to Kary Mullis, who you already talked about a bit. And I'm not sure that he said should never be used for identifying a germ. I think that you actually already kind of addressed this question, as insofar as I can understand exactly what's being said. Do you want to add anything there? Or?
Well, just that Koch's postulates are actually a predecessor of the current standard for establishing a causal relationship between a virus and a disease. And so we did address it earlier. I'd be very surprised if Kary Mullis or anybody else said it should never be used to identify a germ. But if he did say that, or anybody credible said it, I'd like to know what their reasoning was.
Yeah, good. Would you think it's safe to run on an outdoor trail if other runners passing by aren't observing social distancing or wearing masks? Signed, Apprehensive in Austin. We've talked about this a bit before, and I think it's really a question of decreasing your risks. And you decrease them to zero, and you never leave the bubble that you've built around yourself. And you increase them with every interaction that you have. If you're outside and you're running behind other runners who aren't wearing masks, is likely dangerous. You're in their plume of breath, and they're exerting themselves, and they're likely releasing viral particles if they're sick. But passing them, and maybe even doing simple things like, to some degree, working to blow out when as you pass people, as opposed to inhaling. It's not fully safe, but it's safer than being in an enclosed space with people. In fact, we were, for the first time, in an enclosed space we actually got some tests yesterday. And you said to me while we were waiting, everyone's masked up and it's just the three of us and the nurse or the PA in the room. And you said, I think this is the most dangerous thing we've done since lockdown.
Yep.
Right. So being outside, being out in nature, running, biking, electric unicycling, passing other people doing the same, except for electric unicycling, which only the three of you do. It's much safer than a vast majority of things that you might be doing.
Yeah, the evidence really suggests this is very hard to catch outdoors. And on a slightly related note, as you pass the other runner, try to make it look effortless. You'll feel good.
So we're going to do just three more here, and then we're going to switch to the super chat questions from the current live stream. Hello, doctors. Do we have any idea when metacognition came onto the scene for humans or our genus, etc.? Can't wait for your book. Hopefully it finds you in Vancouver, Canada. Well, I'd love it to find us in Vancouver, Canada. It's a gorgeous city. Metacognition, I guess it depends a little bit on what exactly is meant by metacognition. To understand, what we describe as consciousness, and look at those species that have, those other species that have some form of consciousness, you look at traits like sociality and long developmental periods, which in humans we call childhoods, and multiple generations, three or more living together, there's something else I'm forgetting there. Biparental care, of course, well, not inherently by parental care, but like social parenting by at least more than one member, even if it's not by parental care. So the other great apes have that. All the other apes have that. Many other monkeys have that. So what else is included in metacognition? With regard to theory of mind, baboons have theory of mind, and they're not all that closely related to us. So there's a lot of ways to look at it, and we'd need a little bit more specificity on what's meant by metacognition.
Yeah, I think the problem is that you have to set a threshold when you're ready to call it metacognition. And if you set the threshold sufficiently low, then it will be super ancient. If you set the threshold sufficiently high to mirror what we have that you would call metacognition, then it's going to be tied up with the evolution of language, which is still debated, but almost certainly goes back, 500,000 years at least.
Language, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, super variable in terms of the...
But, again, it doesn't start instantaneously either. So there's, proto-language and all of that. So anyway, the question is really tied up in where you set the threshold. And then we could take a coarse guess, but it probably wouldn't be too useful.
Okay. Hi, guys. My question is, do you think it's that the human race will slowly become less naturally attractive due to artificial ways of increasing one's attractiveness, like makeup and plastic surgery? Yeah.
Yes, I mean, for two reasons. One, it takes the burden off of attractiveness, and so you will over evolutionary time potentially lose something. But then there's also this question about creating an artificial glut of a very prepackaged kind of beauty, which then suggests a kind of inauthenticity. And then what becomes beautiful is authenticity, which is more synonymous with ugliness or something. So it does get very confused. I do think our superficial obsessions are not healthy, and to the extent that they are being amplified by multi-billion-dollar industries which seed our insecurities in order to sell us stuff, that it's time to call it quits.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yep.
Final question here. Do you know any COVID-19 study telling us something more about what happens to a person with asthma getting COVID? Love the show and both of you guys. Oh, we got I think it's a radio emoji. So.
Oh, cool.
It might be a battery. I can't tell from here.
In any case, there was definitely some irony there.
Yeah. Boy, I have not seen anything specifically on asthma. We've looked at some of the stuff on smoking. Looks like smoking is not the comorbidity people were expecting it to be. It may not be productive. It may be productive. It may actually be a comorbidity. It's confusing.
Yeah.
So I suspect that asthma is not as much of a risk factor as people would think it should be for an acute respiratory syndrome.
Yep.
But I don't actually have my fingers on any of that together. Now, do we have...
You get at least the $50 questions right below that.
Right below...
Yep, right there.
I already did that one.
Oh,
Yep.
don't worry about it.
Yep. So where is the Google?
There it is.
There we go.
I put a line.
There we go. Okay. Do you have a link to your probability diagram and or supporting evidence? So I don't know if you can put a link up or not.
I can find a way to do it. I'm a little concerned that, it's a demonstration of what such a thing should look like. But as I said, I don't want to be synonymized with that belief, because the whole point of doing things by percentage is the hope that as information emerges, that one's position is flexible. Anyway, I've thought about generating a blank one for people to fill in their own percentages. And unfortunately, the program I made it in makes that a little harder than it should be. But I will think about either regenerating it or finding a way to clear the percentage numbers and giving a link to that for sure.
Okay. Looks like there aren't that many here, so we may be able to get back to a few more. Oh, except more coming in now. The next one just seems to be not a question. Women in, I don't know what to make of this. Should I just read this? It just seems like a list of words.
Sure.
Women in science like Rosalind Franklin, DNA. which is to say she's the usually unnamed co-discoverer of DNA along with Nobel recipients Watson and Crick. A coronavirus of the type first identified by Dr. June Almeida in 1964. As for math, one of the most beautiful women ever was Hedy Lamarr. Actually, I do remember that Great Women of Mathematics account has done a Hedy Lamarr thread in the past, which I also did not know until then, that she was a mathematician.
Yes,
Amazing.
I had missed that we had not seen it, but wasn't there a great Hedy Lamarr documentary in the last several years?
No, sir.
Anyway, it was something I wanted us to see, but I don't think we ended up doing it.
You claim that creating subjective experience was evolution's simplest mechanism for allowing an individual to compare two perspectives. What kind of mechanism could create experience from scratch?
What kind of mechanism could create experience from scratch? Well, it depends where you're asking the question from, right?
Yeah.
In other words, let's just take our visual cortex for a second. Our visual cortex creates a representation of the outside world, and actually there are elements of it that can be understood from the outside. In other words, basically it's like a computer program that has declared an array of variables that then mirrors the position of objects in the world. So it's a physical representation of an outside space that has an analogy to it. I don't find anything particularly troubling about the idea that you could take neuronal wetware and you could create a data structure that would allow a representation of another person's cognitive process to be represented inside of it. I think at some level, the more we learn about how the neuronal processes actually function, and the more we understand about the complexities of the brain, the less this will seem like something that is incompatible with what we know of neurons. I mean, each individual neuron is interesting at a level that should cause us to model it distinctly from, let's say, a binary computer. But I believe we will get there if we live long enough.
Is there an evolutionary basis for man flu? Maybe men trade frequency for severity. Maybe we're just babies. So I think this man flu, in quotes, in the original question, is a reference to the fact that COVID-19 is killing more men than women. It's like 55-45 or even 60-40. Like it's quite substantial.
Yeah.
And of course, this isn't a flu, but it's like a flu in some ways. But you know, what might be the reason behind it affecting men more severely? Because actually, let me say first, I just saw some numbers. I think it might have been Oregon, actually, just the Oregon numbers that show that actually a larger number of women have tested positive, and it doesn't say what the background testing rates are. So it may just be that women are getting tested more, and therefore more women are being found to be more of the people who are positive are women, as opposed to more of the people, as opposed to the alternative. I'm going to confuse myself if I say it over again. So even though more women have tested positive in Oregon than men, still more men have died than women. So even when the background expectation should be, well, if it's scaling, then more women should have died. They haven't.
So I don't think this is so surprising. I think that there is an element of the way selection plays with trade-offs that people have not spent time thinking about. So the analogy I would use is tropical organisms. Tropical organisms are spectacularly effective competitors in general compared to their temperate counterparts, but they are much less tolerant of variation in their environment. So they are simultaneously strong competitively and fragile physiologically. That is to say, they require narrow tolerances to do the amazing stuff they do. Men seem to suffer from something analogous to this. And this is probably the result of the fact that, historically speaking, there's been an awful lot of polygyny in the human species. And that polygyny means that sexual competition between men has been very strong. And that basically you didn't want to be a male loser because a male loser wouldn't reproduce. So what that has resulted in is selection for strong competitive abilities in men, which has made them fragile over time. In other words, in cultures where highly successful men reproduce with multiple women, then winning the position of successful man would be more evolutionarily desirable, and that would cause the borrowing of future vitality, basically of longevity, in the pursuit of greater strength at peak. And so men are physically stronger, but they age faster. And aging faster is a proxy for how vulnerable you are to any pathogen.
Great. Not great. The conclusion. Nice explanation, man.
I'm glad I lived to see the end of it.
Next question. How does the pandemic simulation exercise, parentheses, event 201, that took place shortly before this outbreak influence your understanding of how likely the virus is to have been intentionally released? I know of Event 201. I know very little about it particularly. I would say that pandemic simulation exercises should be expected to be being run by governments frequently, given what has been understood about the risk of pandemic outbreaks for decades onto centuries at this point, that it would actually be shocking if pandemic simulation exercises weren't being run. And just like the idea that it was clearly the fish market and the seafood market in Wuhan that released this thing, there's something about putting two things together that seem unlikely, where actually if this was planned, wouldn't they not have done a pandemic simulation right before they actually released a pandemic? Right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a rabbit hole I haven't been down, so I can't say very much about whether this is going to be easily dismissed or it's one of these things that seems crazy and is more troubling when you get there. But I guess I should look into it.
Would you get Dinesh D'Souza to do his next documentary about you, Bret?
No.
Yeah. Okay, good. Should geopolitical stability be part of the opening calculus? For example, breadbaskets of the world, U.S., China, and Brazil, are disrupted. Scarcity leads to hunger, leads to war.
Now you're talking. I mean, this is
absolutely.
This is a major concern. And when we talk about the problem of game theory at every scale in the way we come off lockdown and face this, the point is, unfortunately, you can't have a Yahoo nation decide to opt out of dealing with its pandemic and not have the world suffer consequences from the opt-out. This is one of the things that, to the extent that you look into the game theory, is really frightening, is that we have to come to terms or we are going to default to lowest common denominator kind of response. So anyway, yes, I have to say I am concerned about something like a destabilized world sliding into armed conflict of a massive scale as one of the possible end states here.
Yep.
There is a new super chat in the other document.
Okay. In response to your answer on subjective experience, why call your new construct consciousness if subjective experience existed much earlier? Love you.
Why call it consciousness? Okay. The problem is I don't know how informed that question is with respect to what we mean about consciousness and why. What I would say is a great many people are interested in the question of how consciousness arose and how it functions. We think they are making an error, and that the question is not so difficult if you define terms in a natural fashion. And so why wouldn't we be interested in pointing out that this question, which is, according to many, intractable, actually has a relatively simple solution? If we're right, then that's a at least a big savings in terms of time that might otherwise be wasted pursuing, a non-answer. So I don't know. Seems like the thing to do. I believe we're defining terms naturally, and I hope it works, and we'll see.
Good. Okay, just going back to the Super Chat questions and comments from the first live stream. Your respect for your audience is made clear by the level of personal integrity you display. Many thanks for the gorgeously articulate and balanced responses. Wishing you all the best from Berlin. Thank you. Must be really late where you are. Thank you. Heather, thanks for referencing that science article. Love you guys. This clears a lot of things up. You're welcome. With the prevalence of politicized, disingenuous, and dishonest news, would you and the IDW be willing to partner on a new, trustworthy media platform?
We get pitched this kind of thing all the time, and I would say what we've got is unacceptable platforms that obviously have a desire to infantilize us and to tell us what's true, do not have the perspective to do it honorably or well, and we have no ability to figure out where to go next. In other words, if we somehow collectively decided that the censorious instincts of the major platforms were unacceptable, and there was a place to go, or that there was a project that held the promise of doing this that really wasn't going to just take the efforts and squander them, I think we'd be all in. I can't speak for anybody else, but because we all need a platform that doesn't censor us, there would be a great deal of enthusiasm. But we've heard great proposals, and all of them suffer from the question of what are the chances that they are going to rise above all of the other great proposals. And so anyway, it's a lot of very little fish and no ability to distinguish which ones might have a potential.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, for sure. But separating the wheat from the chaff turns out to be more than a full-time job, and not one that either of us is particularly good at,
yeah.
I think.
That said, I will say there is a project with whom we have spent a great deal of time talking about how the future might look, and maybe it's time to bring them on the podcast and to talk to the world about it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Super chat from the other project.
Okay, I'm going to pull one more from here first. Does physical contact, that is handshakes and hugs, have any evolutionary benefit? If so, does this benefit surpass the contagion risk of such contact? Of course it has evolutionary benefit. Touch is a big part of how we communicate with one another, and it conveys meaning and connection in a way that words and even facial expressions can't. Handshakes can probably drop off the list of things that we do without really almost anyone losing too much sleep over what's been lost to nonverbal communication. Hugs, like in Europe, there are a lot of different ways, a lot of different numbers of pecks on the cheek that are used to introduce yourself to each other. These seem to be very important to the cultures where they are. They are certainly high risk of spreading certain kinds of disease. Hugs are hugely wonderful and important. So, is there an evolutionary benefit? Yes. Are some of those benefits worth dropping for some safety reasons? Yes. Where's the line? Don't know.
Here's the problem. You're living in a world in which, instead of being in a small population that's insulated from almost all of the pathologies circulating in other populations, you're exposed to almost all of them by virtue of airplanes and other such things. And so, yeah, it's a terrible loss that normal human contact is now dangerous at a level that we have to think about these things. But I would ask you to consider how much we are losing. People are losing family members who go to the hospital and predictably die, and nobody can be there with them. the cost of what we are suffering is so high that we really have to think about how to stop it in its tracks and how to prevent the maximum number of people from getting it, because the horrors that occur in places where this is happening to lots of people are almost unimaginable.
Indeed. Next question. Many university grads overvalue the normal distribution and undervalue black swan events. How do I convince colleagues that outliers that exist are important? Wow, that's a great and astute question. This is one of the problems of having a little bit of knowledge, right? That you get a little bit of statistics and you see a bell curve, more theoretically known as a normal distribution, and you think, and maybe you even hear about regression to the mean, and you think everything is a normal distribution, and rare things because they're rare can't be important. Obviously, Taleb, who you reference here with black swan events, has written a tremendous amount on this. His writing can be dense, to put it lightly. How do you convince you don't want to hand a bunch of Taleb books to colleagues and then keep them as friends mostly. How do you do this in a simple conversation? I think it's going to be so context dependent that it's going to be hard to give any sort of rubric overall.
I would come at it a different way.
Okay.
I think the problem is we are economically incentivized into this wrong thinking, right? Now, you reference people who have college education, and this may be one of the ways that we are economically incentivized to this wrong conclusion. But the basic point is, if you are properly concerned about black swan events, you are less competitively effective under normal circumstances because bell curves are common. And that means that these rare tail events, which are on a bell curve or a power law distribution, whichever, but the point is, if you play the game as if the black swan events aren't going to happen, you may win the game for your entire life and never see the black swan event. So you came out ahead for gambling on the likely outcomes, and only in the very rare circumstance of the black swan does the person's wisdom, the person who was trying to call your attention to the danger, show itself. And they may not survive to see their win, much less are they likely to be able to capitalize on it, since it's very hard to time it. So in any case, the point is, look, this is actually a strategy that is unfolding. And those of us who get the black swan problem are losing. So I think pointing out that in some sense this is a free rider problem issue, that a disbelief in black swans is a competitive strategy and it's an unkind one because it's putting all of us in danger, that's the way to reach them. So anyway, try it out.
I think accusing people who believe too strongly in normal distributions of being free riders is going to be a tough sell, but I love it as an approach.
Well, it also it means that you won't be spending so much time on the phone because you'll start losing friends and they
you
will
get
stop
all your
calling.
time back.
Yeah, you do.
Okay. The way you opened up the last live stream was great. Make America civil again. Thank you. Okay, what are we at time-wise? We got time for one more question?
You have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Let's do one more question.
All right.
All right. So there's one here that's going to be a much longer answer about laying out the evidence that makes you think a lab is the most likely source, although I would say, again, just that you did a lot of that in a few live streams ago, and maybe you'll come back to it.
I would just say,
okay,
at some point, I think it would be worth going through the branches of the diagram. Maybe there are branches that aren't on there, but I've tried to be complete. I probably need a garbage branch for anything not contemplated here. But it would be worth explaining the rationale for each of the percentages so that people could basically take on a model for what it is that dictates why you would expect a particular outcome. And I should think about whether or not there's a way to do that that wouldn't bore a large fraction of the audience to tears.
Okay. And finally, is civilization's tendency to engage... Did I already read this one? No. Is civilization's tendency to engage in behaviors that are productive in the short term and perilous in the long term a kind of antagonistic pleiotropy? Does this mean that society is doomed to senescence, in quotes, or its analog?
Yeah. So there's been a large number of people who've participated in the Patreon discussions that I've been running now for several years.
A couple of years, yeah. Almost 3.
And one of the longtime folks in the evolutionary discussion posed the question, is there a cultural analog to senescence? And I thought it was so good that I made a little video about it. And basically, my point was...
you have it up on your channel?
It's on my channel. Basically, civilization has an absolute analog to senescence, and what we are living is the incoherence at the end of civilization's life. And basically, the short version is that because things that are profitable early and have costs late tend to accumulate, that those behaviors that are economically productive but have environmental consequences that are dangerous tend to make people politically powerful, which tends to make those properties irreversible. And what that means is that we are doing many, many things that are ultimately destructive of civilization. And this is what senescence looks like. So yes, it's more than an analogy. We have the exact phenomenon that causes a body to degrade with age, causing civilization to degrade with age. And if there's one thing you should be most frightened of, it's this. A civilization that cannot go in reverse when it has to is doomed. All right.
Thanks, man.
On that happy note, have we reached the end of the Q&A?
I think we have.
All right. Well, those are some excellent questions. We look forward to the next one. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit notify, and if you really love us, comment. It's just good for you. It's good for us. And we don't read them all, but we do read many of them. All right. Be well. Stay safe.